Okay, we're on again. Alright, so the next question. What are some of the proper ways of conducting a reenacting battle?
Well, the best way to do it is exactly the same way that they would have done it back in the 1860s. The commands that the officers give are the same as the officers would have given back in the 1860s. And let's face it, that's one of the reasons why I think earlier in one answers to one of your questions is one of the reasons why I do it, because I want to hear what the commands are from the officers and how do I move in concert with my with the other reenactors on the field. So anybody that's been in the military knows that the military commands of today, contemporary commands, are much different than what they were back then. They fought differently back then. They believed in being right next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, because when they fired, their concentration of fire was that bullets were traveling down the battlefield 6, 8, 10 inches apart. So the belief was is if you had your men close together, shoulder to shoulder, when they fired, the bullets that were traveling down the field are bound to hit something. So I think what makes a good reenactment battle scene is the commanders know the commands, and they're able to move their men around the battlefield the same way that they would have done back in the 1860s. And that's also what is also important is not only do the officers need to know the commands, but the men in the ranks need to know how to react to those commands when they're given. So that's what kind of makes a good reenactment battle scene. I mean, obviously, if you win, it's more fun than if you lose.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the battles where the Yankees were overrun or retreated or skedaddled, as it was called, those aren't as much fun as when you beat the Confederates and they retreat or they run off the field. But sometimes the Yankees lost, sometimes they didn't. But I think the most important thing is that getting the commands right and moving around the battlefield like the real soldiers did back in the 1860s.
And you talked about before, one of the questions that there was a part where you kind of get you get so much into the action that you become like really zealous.
Yeah.
And do you think that that's also like in terms of kind of like a safety, like a safety concern in the middle of a battle is people get so like much into it that they might become overzealous?
Well, you bring up a good point. Safety is our number one concern in reenacting. We would rather do nothing than do something that's unsafe. So all of us are ingrained from the first day of reenacting that we have to do it in a safe manner. I think what you're alluding to is what we call in the reenactment community a magic moment, where you've kind of gone on that time machine back to the 1860s, and now everything that's before you is like it was in the 1860s. Okay, so
Right.
As I told you on that field in Gettysburg back at the 135th Gettysburg reenactment, when I looked out on that field and saw 10,000 Confederates marching across that field, I said to myself, this is a magic moment, because this is what a soldier in the 7th Michigan back on July 3rd, 1863, saw at that point in time, like I am seeing right now. So it's like a recreation of history, and it's living rather than a painting or a picture or something that's in a museum, that now you're actually seeing it live in person. So you bring up a good point about safety, and we're all, even though we're firing and loading and firing, loading and firing. We all do it in a safe manner because that's the number one concern. We all want to. We all know that when the reenactment's over, we all have to go home, and some of us have to go to work the next day, and some of us, as I am, I'm retired. I don't have to worry about going to work the next day, but I don't want to get hurt either. So safety is our number one concern. So
I would think that one of the most more dangerous moments would be like if during a charge, because I know whenever you get you get really into it, and suddenly you're really you're running and you're running and you're going at the person that can kind of the whole adrenaline.
It does happen. It's usually very choreographed ahead of time so that each reenactor knows what his role is in that charge, so that nobody gets hurt. I mean, one of the things we don't do, well actually two of the things we don't do, is use the ramrod while we're reenacting. So the ramrod was used to push down the powder, push down the projectile into the musket because it was a muzzle loader. We never use the bayonet because of the fear that it might get in the barrel and shoot off, and now you've got a ramrod. Did I say bayonet? I meant ramrod. You don't want the ramrod flying down the battlefield. The other thing we don't do is we do not fix bayonets. The bayonets have a sharp point,
right?
And when you're marching around and engaging the enemy, even though your intent is never to use the bayonet as a weapon, somebody could fall, somebody could trip, and now you've got the bayonet on the end of the musket, and the person in the rear rank might trip and fall, and now his musket hits the person in front of him, and it's got a sharp point on it. So we don't use the bayonets when we do reenactments. So again, those two things aren't really authentic because the real soldiers would have used the ramrods to load their muskets, and the real soldiers would have used their bayonets on the end of their muskets in charges. But in the interest of safety, we do not use either one of those two devices because of the fear that there could be an accident. So, and again, any charge that you talk about is choreographed ahead of time, and so that nobody is going to do anything that you're not aware that they're going to be doing, because nobody wants to get hurt.
Oh, right. Next question. How do you go about working with other reenacting groups?
Social media has really increased the opportunities to work with other groups. I mean, email. Think about back when I got involved in the hobby. We had paper newsletters. We had to call people on the phone. We had to send letters in the mail. And now you can reach out to a group of 20 people with the click of an email button. So web pages have made it a lot easier to reach out. Facebook pages have made it a lot easier to reach out. Email. And they've kind of dispensed with using monthly newsletters to inform the group. So if you want to reach out to another reenacting group because you'd like your numbers to be bigger than your own reenactment group, it's easy to do. You send an email to the person in charge of that unit, and you try to work together to get them to come to your event. Also, when you have a reenactment, it's always good to have Confederates. So you have to reach out to a Confederate group or two to get them to supply some people to come out to the reenactment. So the ability to reach out to people on email or any other media that we have today is so much easier than it was back in the mid-90s when I got involved in the hobby. So that's basically how we do it. Just reaching out via email, things like that.
How about like in terms of like working with other groups and during the actual reenactment, like with Camp Life and the battles?
Yeah, generally, like if you have like a Jackson reenactment, which is probably the biggest one. In fact, it is the biggest one in the Midwest, and it's in Jackson, Michigan. It's usually the last weekend in August. We can have as many as 300-400 reenactors there, from maybe as many as 15, 20, 25 different units. And what they do is for Camp Life, they keep all the units together so that you're camping next to your part. And then when we do the battles, they usually try to put the groups together in companies so that you maybe got at least a 30-man company. So you might have your reenactment group. The 15th Michigan is with the 7th Michigan is with the 17th Michigan, so that you all fall in together. And the beauty of it is that we all respond to the same commands, because the commanders that are in charge of, the commander that's in charge of the 15th Michigan knows the commands. The 7th Michigan captain knows the commands, and we all respond to, in unison hopefully, to the commands of the officers. So it's fairly easy for them to combine 3, 4, as many as 5 different units into one to make one large unit, a large company or companies or even a battalion. So it's, nobody really has a problem with it, because we all know that during the American Civil War, a company was 100 men,
Right.
and a regiment was about 1,000 men. As the war dragged on, the sizes of the companies and the regiments got smaller because of attrition. So maybe a good size regiment would be 600 men. But when you send 20 reenactment groups of maybe 5 or 6 guys per group, you don't want to move a group around the battlefield of 5 guys. It doesn't look right.
Right.
It isn't the way it happened. So we'll join up with other units and form a larger company or a battalion, and then move around the battlefield under the commands of the officers. So it's really not that big of a problem.
Okay. So do you prefer large reenactment battles or more like smaller skirmishes?
Well, as I pointed out earlier, my favorite event of all time, and I've been doing this for I think 22 years, was the 135th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. And the reason is because of its size.
Mm-hmm.
Were there small skirmishes during the American Civil War? Yes. But it's easy to make a small skirmish. You get 10 guys from your unit, you get 10 guys from another unit, and you put on a 20-man small skirmish. Those are easy to do. What's really hard to do is get 10, 15, 20,000 reenactors all in one place, all at one time, to do a particular battle. Now, the battles that we do are obviously choreographed as close to the real battle as possible. So if the right flank of the Union Army moved at 3 o'clock, when we're doing the reenactment, the right flank of the Union Army is going to move at 3 o'clock. So we try to choreograph the battles as close to the real battle that we possibly can. Take the same amount of casualties that the real units took during the real battle. So if you ask me, and you did, which one I like better, I like the large ones, because you can really see what it was like to have thousands of men on a battlefield, moving around the battlefield, rather than a small skirmish where you've got 15, 20, 30 guys trying to recreate a battle. So if you're asking which one I like better, I like the big ones better.
I agree. In the Civil War, reenactors and the postmodern sense of history. So this is one of my sources. In the Civil War, reenactors and the postmodern sense of history, Journal of American Culture by Dennis Hall. He states that reenactors portray the time period that they do out of a sense of nostalgia for that time period. Do you believe that's true? Why or why not?
Well, when I hear the word nostalgia, I think about, in my own life, going back to something that happened in my past. So I have nostalgia for being young again. I have nostalgia for maybe being in high school again. I have nostalgia for maybe being in college again, or the first job, or the first date. You think about those things. Those things provide me with a sense of nostalgia. Obviously, I wasn't alive during the American Civil War, so I don't have a sense of nostalgia for the American Civil War. As I told you earlier, what got me involved in reenacting and why I do the living history demonstrations is because for some reason I have a very keen interest in the American Civil War, what happened during the American Civil War. And the reenacting is only part of my journey to understand the American Civil War better. As I said, you can read books, you can go to battlefields, you can go to museums. I think reenacting is another component that to that study of why the men did what they did and how they did it. So nostalgia, if you extend the word nostalgia to like all time, going back to medieval times and that, well, I guess you could call it nostalgia. But I think nostalgia is more of things that maybe you experienced in your life and you would like to go back to experience that again. So I don't know if nostalgia is the right word. I'd have to look it up in the dictionary to make sure I'm using the definition correctly, or if he's using the definition correctly. But I don't do it for nostalgia. I do it to complete a study that has kind of been a lifelong study that started back when I got that first picture book about the American Civil War, and it just captured my desire to learn more about it and learn more and learn more and learn more. And my quest has been somewhat insatiable. I'm constantly finding new things. I mean, my wife sometimes says, "Why are you reading another book about the American Civil War? You know the Yankees are going to win." And that's true, but I know that going in. But there were over 3 million men that fought in the American Civil War, and each one of them has a story. 600 and some odd thousand didn't come back. Their families have a story. How did they adjust to their loved one, their husband, brother, whatever, not coming home? So there's 3 million stories